Hi, I'm Justin Taylor. Some of you may know me already from watching the Good Timing podcast. You might know me from the Reddit forums, the Beach Boys forums. You might know me from some other forums as well over the years. I've been a big Beach Boys fan for about 35 years now, since I was a little kid back in the 80s. Yeah, it was a really interesting time to kind of be a fan because it's kind of when the band kind of fell out of favor with the public right before Kokomo, and there wasn't a lot of information back then about the band. And I kind of over the years I've kind of gone through different periods of studying the band and reading books and just a lot of different information happening. And the specific period, 1974 to 1978, really interests a lot of people, especially now, I find. Um, Figaro's having fun here. This is my cat, Figaro. Um, yeah, this specific period really interests a lot of fans because there isn't a lot of information about it. And I'm going to try and change that a little bit, especially looking at it, looking back upon it back in the 70s. So I'm going back to articles from the 70s and pulling from that and explaining different things that articles said and reviews said and interviews from the 70s with the band members, with people around the band, interviews from now with the band, and also people around the band. I'd love to have some special guests on here as well too. We'll see what will happen with that, and yeah, just trying to share the information that I've kind of over the last year in developing. I was developing a book. I'd really like to share that information via video with all of you out there and to kind of make that public. So, as you can see, I'm not really in it for money. It's just I just really want to share this information with people because a lot of people are very confused with this era, and what exactly happened, how much input did Brian have on the albums, how much input did Carl have on the albums, and yeah, we'll just try and kind of go back and see exactly what we can find to kind of cobble this story together the best we can. I know a lot of autobiographies and or biographies and autobiographies skip on this specific era a lot, just kind of saying that Brian went back with Dr. Landy and that he kind of got better and then he went from there kind of thing, and then he relapsed again and then he went back with Dr. Landy. That's kind of how this era is kind of shown. There's not a lot of information, so hopefully with this we'll change it. 1974, James William Guercio, he was most of all known for his work with the band Chicago. And Chicago was kind of a big hit maker at this point, and by 1974, they had a number of hits by this point. So Guercio had quite a bit of pull in the music industry, and he became quite friendly with the Beach Boys at this point, too. Um, yeah, they left the previous manager, Jack Riley, the previous year, 1973. So it was time for a new beginning. It was time to kind of bring in fresh talent to manage the band. And Jim Garcia was kind of the guy. So, also because of Chicago was a huge American, probably the biggest American act at that point. So they probably felt that they could get back on top by hiring Garcia to manage them and produce them later on. Jim Garcia actually went to LA to meet with the guys and told them that they needed to kind of retread the whole show and to drop some of the newer songs because they're doing almost all new songs at this point, and to drop all the new songs, or not all of them, most of them, and to kind of focus in on some of the oldies and some of the older songs, because he felt with kind of the American Graffiti craze that was happening around this time, and with shows like Happy Days coming out and stuff like that, that it was time to kind of go back to the 60s and to do that, to kind of retread that kind of territory. Um, it was actually Carl and Dennis that agreed with Guercio at this point in the meeting. There was only one rule, though. Guercio wanted control of the band, and he wanted Carl as the leader. So Dennis was a huge advocate of this, and he struck up a friendship extremely fast with Jim Garcia. So they began rehearsing before their 1974 tour quite strenuously compared to the last tours, due to Garcia's wishes. He wanted it like perfectly, almost note for note of the original recordings, or as close as they could get it with the band that they had at the time. So they had only planned to tour throughout the U.S. this year, and also in select areas of Canada. So it was quite. It wasn't like a world tour. It was just kind of like a cross North American tour.
As you know, in the Beach Boy music, the most intricate part of it is the bass lines, because you'll have simple harmonic progressions, but the bass lines are very complicated. Wouldn't it be nice? Good vibrations. I mean, Brian really understood, from a Sebastian Bach point of view, the counterpoint. And Carl was very patient with me, and we sat down and we wrote out individual charts for almost all the tunes. Eddie Carter was the bass player and helped me out during that period.
Ed Carter, who had played bass with the band since about 1968, was still playing bass with them on this tour. He had actually had some prior engagements that he had to kind of go and leave at certain points during the tour to continue with his session work and some of the other bands he was playing with. This is when Jim Guercio kind of came in and subbed on bass for him. Ed Carter showed Guercio the different bass lines before going off and doing his prior engagements. Kind of helped him get a good feel in for performing with the band, because Guercio really hadn't performed too much aside from a couple spots with Chicago for quite some time. Carl and Guercio kind of put this new show together in 1974, incorporating many older songs. As the last couple of years, they'd kind of been shying away from doing many of the oldies. As I mentioned before, they were doing a lot of newer songs, and this was kind of the thing that Guercio wanted to kind of bring in, these older songs that hadn't been heard for quite some time. Because of this huge shift in the set list and direction of the band, this decision was made by Guercio and Carl to play every single college, every single university, basically every single gig they could kind of get at this point. Some nights they'd do two shows in entirely different cities, so they were traveling quite a bit to kind of make ends meet and to try and play as much as they possibly could to make the most amount of money that they could, and to play for the most amount of fans that they could. Guercio mentioned years later that the previous set like guys were doing was incredibly hard deal on the show, as the show didn't go over well at all in his eyes. So this was kind of the huge catalyst for change. Rick Nelson, road manager at the time, explains, they always internally had big discussions and arguments about which songs to play. Mike always wanted to play all of the oldies, as many as they could, because he knew the effect of them. Carl, along with Ricky, kept on saying that creativity was in the new material. They'd come up with a compromise, and a couple of days later, they'd change it. It wasn't until Guercio came along and started touring that there was a person that could say, yeah, Mike's right, and Carl's right, and make the show totally work, and kind of give that compromise. So that was what Rick Nelson had to say at the time. And Guercio had meetings after the shows, kind of sitting down with the group and kind of showing them critiques of their performances. They recorded the shows and kind of saying, this, you did this right, you did this right, this was wrong here, this section needs to be fixed here, this section needs to be fixed there. This is something that they never really done. They never really gone back and looked at performances and kind of critiqued them. So this was kind of the era where they started to really hone in and really make their live shows more about a show than it was about just going up there and playing and soloing and kind of doing a free-form thing, which was more what they were doing from about 1971 to 1973. Now we're kind of entering in on kind of a new era of the Beach Boys, one based on nostalgia and a yearning for kind of simpler times. The Holland era and proto-prog rock that kind of was the sound of the previous incarnation of the band was soon to be gone forever. Larry Ucaro, the booking agent hired for the show, then went ahead and booked the show. The idea was to originally record a new studio album with Jim Guercio producing in Colorado. It was in Nederland, Colorado, I believe. And it was supposed to be released by the summer of 1974. So this was something that they had already planned on doing quite soon into 1974 and to have it released by the summer. So you'd have a new Beach Boys album by summer 1974. This changed over time and kept getting pushed back further and further and further. As we go through these episodes, you'll see exactly where these kind of timeline, these points are that the papers are kind of saying, oh, the Beach Boys are recording now, and they'll have this album out by summer, and then they'll have it out by fall, and they'll have it out by winter. It keeps getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. The Beach Boys even recently opened up their own brother studios in Santa Monica to try out ideas and to do full recordings themselves as well too, because they were really interested in kind of moving forward after Holland and to kind of create like a new era, because they felt that was kind of like an end of an era where they had taken all of their equipment and shipped it all the way to Holland and then brought it back, and there was no place to put it because Marilyn Wilson didn't want it in Brian's home anymore. So some of this was put in Brother Studios. Some of it was dismantled and kind of put in storage, depending on what it was. But a lot of it was put into Brother Studios. So a lot of it was kind of carried over. This was drummer Bobby Figueroa's first tour with the band. Kind of started off on percussion. And then on a few songs, he kind of moved over to the drums, which would allow Ricky Fattar, who was still with the band at this point, to play steel guitar and to do different things, to sing. There was a lot of different things happening because Dennis was still kind of out front singing, and because he had still recovering from his accident with his hand. He punched through a glass door with his. He was kind of having a fun, frisky session with his wife at the time. Kind of got a little bit excited. He was drunk. So he was kind of recovering, and he was kind of moving from keyboards to front, and then you had Ricky moving from pedal steel to singing. So Bobby Figueroa was kind of in between percussion and drums, kind of moving back and forth. This was also one of Billy Hinshe's first full tours. He had kind of been a student at UCLA and recently graduated from them. He was doing filmmaking, doing stuff in filmmaking at UCLA, which is why some of these older, there's actually a video of them from this period, from 1974 on tour, which is really, really interesting. And it's worth a check out if you want to check it out, and it has a lot of like home movies from the band. So Hinchey was Carl's brother-in-law and a good friend of the band for many, many years. They had toured together in the 1960s when Billy was in Dino Desi and Billy. That was a band in the LA area, and they kind of opened for the Beach Boys a few times, and Carl and him became friendly, and Carl actually ended up marrying his sister, Billy's sister, later on. He had quite a connection with the band as well too, because he also sang on some of the records as well too. He sang on Heroes and Villains. It's kind of the most prominent Billy moments in their recorded history thus far. When going through photos from this era, it's really apparent that Hinchey's his place on stage is really, he's kind of out front. It's felt enormously. This could be due to Blondie Chaplin leaving the year before. He was kind of like the guitarist and vocalist before Billy. Billy kind of somewhat replaced him, but it wasn't as an official member. But as you look at these photos at the time, Billy is kind of out front and center. So it's kind of cool to see. He kind of been offered a full-time position earlier too, as a full-fledged member of the band back in the late 60s, in 1969, 1970. He unfortunately passed on this because he was really interested in continuing his studies at UCLA.
Carly could spellbind you for hours playing then and now as a full-fledged jazz pianist. Cuban, Puerto Rican music, Latin jazz, straight-ahead jazz. I mean, he was just amazing to listen to. And then he also could adapt to the rock and roll and to the Beach Boy music, and very, very formidable talent.
Carly Munoz, he was actually from the previous band, the 1973 band. He kind of stayed on for the 1974 band, and he played piano, organ, and synthesizer. Early on the tour, they experienced many sound mishaps. There were kind of issues with feedback and getting a good clean sound.
Each hall was quite different, and so after we had set up the whole system, get it tweaked and get all the monitors set and so forth, I would put on some music and play through the system and then walk the hall with a walkie-talkie and communicate with Rick on stage and Jason and whoever was at the console, and tune the room, so to speak, and get every part of the room sounding as good as possible. And the music I used for that test was Kiki Dee. I've got the music in me.
Drummer Ricky Fataar also began playing pedal steel on stage at this point. He just learned to play the instrument, was recording with it over the last couple years, since 1972 or so. He played a couple parts on Holland, the pedal steel, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I think he was kind of inspired by some of the work with Red Rhodes that they had done previously too, and also some stuff from the band and stuff that was on the radio at the time. It was very rootsy kind of country rock, and it's kind of cool to hear those textures in pop rock music. And I think Ricky kind of picked up on that.
So I got a little showbud pedal steel and just started mucking around with it, and got to figure out my way around a little bit, and then ended up playing it on one of my tunes called We Got Love, and also on Alan Jardine's song. I can't remember the name of it, but anyhow, that was on Holland.
Brian Wilson, who had written the group's biggest hits at this point, was still staying at home and working on different projects. He didn't really like to travel, had extreme paranoia that was getting worse as time went on. He hadn't toured since early 1965, so he really only contributed a few tracks, usually co-writes, to the last few 1970s Beach Boys albums. Since about 1970, Sunflower was the last one that he was really on. 1974 saw a lot of changes with Brian, with his weight creeping up, gradually getting more afraid of the world, dealing with agoraphobia, and the death of his father in 1973. It caused him immense pain. This is like a huge turning point in the way that he'd interact with the band after this point. The Beach Boys and making music were kind of like the last things on his mind. The death of his father really, really affected him. Brian's brother, Carl, was the leader of the band, picking up the slack that Brian left behind.
Words like spiritual or something when you think of Carl, because he had that kind of stillness, that kind of gravity that just you respected so much playing with him. And even today, I can get emotional thinking about him and listening to that music and his voice. It's just overwhelming. What a wonderful guy he was.
Synth player Don Lewis opened for the band on occasion and also played with them at this time. Dennis, Carl, and Guercio found Lewis in a night spot playing a one-man band show with multiple synthesizers. They were kind of relatively new at the time, so this was a really exciting thing to see. Lewis didn't really know the music too well, but was flattered that he'd been invited on the road with the Beach Boys. Surprisingly, a few years before, Bobby Figueroa, who had just recently joined the band on this tour, he had seen Lewis as well, too, playing at another club, and was in shock that he and Lewis were now on the same stage. It's kind of like deja vu.
He was the more aloof, I think, of all the Beach Boys in terms of interacting with him during the day. Al was much more hey, let's go out and have a beer together, let's go have some dinner, let's talk stories and so on. Mike kind of held himself back. Mike Love, I have to thank him to this day for balancing out what could be a very, very hectic and rat race kind of lifestyle with the situation, with the enjoyment and practice of meditation, which he had everybody in the group exposed to in England, I think even before 1974.
Mike Love and Al Jardine kind of struck up a burgeoning friendship over this time, as they were both avid students of and teachers of Transcendental Meditation. They had recently gone to become teachers and wrote a song about it called All This Is That, which is on the Carl and the Passions album. And they also kind of collaborated a bit on the Big Sur trilogy on the Holland album too, as well too. So that was kind of a beginning for their kind of friendship. And yeah, Mike Love was kind of an interesting character in that point. At that point, because he was entirely devoted to transcendental meditation, and this was getting stronger and stronger as time kind of went on, and the more he kind of learned about meditation, and the more kind of seminars he both went to and taught. On this tour, Dennis also took delight in his many pranks, which have kind of become legend over the years.
We were on the way to New York. We were approaching New York City, and Dennis, in one of his things, pranks, whatever, or whims, he orders a pilot, look, go through the Twin Towers. Okay, we're on this Falcon approaching New York. He said, go, you go through the Twin Towers, or you fire. Anyway, the pilot said, I can't do that. I said, well, if you don't do it, you're fired. But that was scary. Dennis used to do quite a few things like that. There are many stories.
As the 70s went on, Dennis became more and more of a creative force.
At the sound checks and the setups for almost all the shows is where I heard Dennis's songs. He would get on that piano, and we'd hear it in the sound system. We're checking our instruments, and Dennis would be playing. And it was during that period he told me that that Billy probably did the changes, but that he wrote "You Are So Beautiful." And it really sounds like a Dennis lyric. It sounds like a Dennis progression. But that's when I really encouraged Dennis to finish these songs. Even if he didn't finish them, take the piece, do the next piece. Because I'm telling you, at every show, every night, there would be, or every other night, there would be some idea that he had been working on. And he would try them out. There'd generally be nobody there, maybe Carl and I. The other guys might be. I'll tell you, Carly was there. Carly took an interest in Dennis's writing. But that's why we restored POB and we went and remixed Bamboo. Dennis had an incredible harmonic command, and he's the closest composer to Brian, and in many ways I think he surpassed him. I think he went beyond it.
Thank you so much for watching this podcast, the first episode of Brian's Back. I hope to bring you more episodes. We're going to try to upload every week and go from there and see where this takes us. I'm not planning on doing this chronologically either. I'm going to pick out a day because the way I originally wrote this was kind of day by day of the band based on their itinerary. And we're just going to do a very, just pick a day and just decide from there what exactly we want to cover of that day and kind of cover it in depth and do short 5 to 10 minute videos. This is probably the longest video because this is introducing 1974 and what exactly happened at the beginning of the year. So thank you for tuning in, and if you want to watch more stuff from me, you can go to the Good Timing podcast. I'm on there as well too. The Reddit Beach Boys forums, I'm on there sometimes. Not posting as much as I used to, but I am still there. If you have a question, don't be afraid to contact me through YouTube. If you want me to cover something specifically, leave a comment below, and I'll take that into consideration for the next episode. Hopefully you have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
There's this saying that goes, keep it clean with Al Jardine. You know, Al Jardine is like, he walked into a room and you have to straighten up, you know. You have to straighten up and fly right. Because, you know, you got to keep it clean with Al Jardine.